Welcome to Cause Before Symptom with your host, James Carner.
Good evening, everybody. Tonight we're going to be talking about Edgar Allan Poe. Is he the first conspiracy theorist or just a drunk? Stick around. Welcome to Cause Before Symptom. I'm your host, James Carner. Tonight is August 27th, 9 p.m., 2024. And I'm here to rock your world for the next hour talking about Edgar Allan Poe and if we should give him any insights of our brain. He shoots, he scores. All right, let's get into it. So Edgar Allan Poe, is he the first conspiracy theorist or just a drunk? Well, I did my research. Edgar Allan Poe, born January 19, 1809, died October 7th, 1849, was an American writer, a poet, author, editor, and literary critic who is best known for his poetry and short stories, particularly his tales of mystery and the macabre. He is widely regarded as a central figure of Romanticism and Gothic fiction in the United States and of American literature. Edgar Allan Poe was one of the country's earliest practitioners of the short story and is considered the inventor of the detective fiction genre, as well as a significant contributor to the emerging genre of science fiction. He is the first well-known American writer to earn a living through writing alone, resulting in a financially difficult life and career. Give a shout out to Amanda, Claire, Lost in the Wind, and Gertison. What is up, people? Edgar Allan Poe has been more misunderstood than any other poet of the recent past. While his life was beautiful and inspired, yet aspersed, his last moments had more of sublimity than those of any of his contemporaries. Throughout his life, Edgar Allan Poe lost the women he loved, including his mother, adoptive mother, and wife, many to tuberculosis. Their absence played a huge role in his writing. He married his 14-year-old cousin, and as offensive as the marriage may be to modern Moors, it appears to have been motivated by Poe's understandable desire to unite what little family he had. While his aunt, Maria Clement, Virginia's mother, consented to the union, always lived with the couple afterwards. Interesting. Now, Netflix did a show called The Fall of the House of Usher. I saw it. Very creepy. Which was inspired by Edgar's book called The Raven. His story tells a tale of uber-wealthy families who are selling their soul to the devil, and the price they pay doesn't compare to the huge amount of death that follows the family's fortunes. They lose their loved ones, but at the cost of millions who fell victim to their fortune. The movie spins hope, which isn't included in the book, about one family member who ends up saving the lives of millions, giving the impression that evil and good cancel each other out. Well, I don't buy it. Edgar was the first recorded conspiracy theorist trying to expose the royal family bloodlines through poetry and short stories. And hopefully tonight I'll prove that to you. The masses were brainwashed through controlled publications, and the only logical way to expose the evil corruption is through code. Readers of Edgar Allan Poe's most famous prose and poetry might be unaware of how often he wrote about science. As John Tresh explains in The Reasons for the Darkness of the Night, Edgar Allan Poe and the forging of American science. In the late 1840s, near the end of his life, Poe had established for himself a unique position as fiction writer, poet, critic, and expert on scientific matters, crossing paths with and learning from those who were producing the apparent miracles of modern science. Poe exposed pseudoscientific hoaxes, and then, to get his own writing noticed, created them himself. He finally received critical acclaim for his now classic short stories, among them The Telltale Heart, which Tresh describes as an act of violent irrationality, detailed in the language of scientific method, and The Raven, which Poe himself proclaimed the greatest poem that has ever been written. Tresh has painted a full landscape of the journalism of the time, describing the conflicts between writers who made serious scientific observations and those eager to sensationalize or misinterpret or misrepresent new discoveries. Poe saw his age's many humbugs and its men of science pushing for foolproof forms of scientific authority on secret partners, writes Tresh. Together they were establishing the modern matrix of entertainment and science, doubt, and certainty. Those who successfully denounced the tricks of charlatans were precisely those with the skills to make themselves believed. So basically, this guy, Tresh, who was doing research on Poe, was saying that Poe was against pseudoscience, and he saw that science was actually being used as magic, and they were lying to the people, and he wanted to expose it, which got him a lot of flack, which could probably give the idea of the dude turning into a drunk because he was under attack all the time, especially financially. Speculation and controversy were rife in the press. In the 1830s and 1840s, the lines between legitimate science, political provocation, and crowd-pleasing quackery were exceedingly difficult to define, he writes. His descriptions of the way the popular press blended news, entertainment, and hype will remind readers of the media landscape of present-day America. Though Tresh himself refrains from explicit comparisons, Poe was also deeply interested in formulating theories about the origins of the universe and the nature of God. Near the end of his life, he wrote a philosophical scientific treatise called Eureka, which has, for reasons that Tresh makes very clear, fallen into obscurity. Poe boasted to a friend that Eureka was destined to revolutionize the world of physical and metaphysical science. But the result was something more confusing than revolutionary. The biographer labels it a serious mess, a glorious mess, but a mess. Despite his success, Poe succumbed to the perversity that he believed was built into human nature. Kind of like what Freud said. We all were attracted to our mother, which I find bullshit and offensive. One of the searing ironies of Poe's life, writes Tresh, was that during the rise of fame, as he developed an ideal of the quasi-omniscient author in total control of the creative process, his life was falling apart. His career, his relationships, and his very mind, the victim of bad luck, alcohol, and self-sabotage. In the end, the telltale heart of the reason for the darkness of the night is this. Poe's fantastic tales, detective stories, and nonfiction writings dramatize the act of inquiry and the struggles, fears, hopes, and delusions of the human being undertaking it. His search for hidden causes places him at a center of the maelstrom of American science in the first half of the 19th century. Tresh has produced a steady, clever, engaging literary biography that provides an excellent survey of an overlooked aspect of Poe's writing. Poe was a warning to all nations about the hidden elite, their pacts with the devil, and what their true intentions are: to steal, kill, and destroy everything in their path for profit. The love of money is the root of all evil, and those that partake become murderers. Not only was Poe a gifted writer, his heart was to expose evil, and through wisdom has continued to show the true intent of corporations and countries in their pursuit for world domination and everlasting life in human form to keep their riches. Now, there are theories abound about Poe's death, but there has not yet been one that proves definitive or a fittingly mysterious end for the master of mystery. No subject regarding Edgar Allan Poe ignites as much controversy as his sudden death at the age of 40, which remains shrouded in mystery. What we know is that Poe planned a trip from Richmond, Virginia to New York City, during which he traveled by steamer and stopped in Baltimore on September 28, 1849. His actions and whereabouts throughout the next 5 days are uncertain. Was alcohol involved? Could he have been on a bender? Maybe. On October 3rd, 1849, printer Joseph Walker found Poe inside or near Gunner's Hall Tavern and sent a note for J.E. Snodgrass, one of Poe's acquaintances in Baltimore. Walker described Poe as appearing in great distress. Snodgrass noted that the clothes Poe wore were disheveled and out of place. He had evidently been robbed of his own clothing or got cheated in an exchange. Snodgrass and his uncle, Henry Herring, both presumed that Poe was in a drunken state and agreed to send him to Washington College Hospital. Once there, Poe was taken to a room reserved for patients who were ill due to intoxication. Poe lapsed in and out of consciousness for the next few days, and according to Dr. John Moran, who questioned Poe about his condition, Poe's answers were incoherent and unsatisfactory. Moran also prevented visitors due to Poe's excitable condition. Moran later noted in a letter to Maria Clem, Poe's mother-in-law, that during a period of consciousness, Poe held vacant, converse, and spectral and imagery objects on the walls. His face was pale and his whole person drenched in perspiration. Poe died quietly before sunrise on Sunday, October 7th, 1849. It may be logical to assume that alcohol played a role in Poe's death, given that it intermittently surfaced as a negative influence during his adult life. But how does it explain why Poe was wearing somebody else's clothes? Nor does it provide any insight into the circumstances that caused him to be found in such an unfortunate state. Well, if you are writing poems and short stories about the rich and how they sell their soul to the devil and the consequences thereof, and trying to get people to see it, and they don't want you to do it, I'm sure they have elixirs back in the 1800s that could drug him, confuse him, send him into the hospital, and eventually kill him. Was Poe a victim of cooping? Well, one of the most popular theories about Poe's death stems from the fact that Edgar Allan Poe was found on Election Day, and Gunner's Hall was a polling station. Is it possible that on that day Poe fell victim to cooping, which is a common method of voter fraud in the 19th century? Cooping victims were kidnapped, drugged, or forced to drink and disguised several times in order to cast several votes. Others have suggested that perhaps Poe was beaten and robbed, or even that he contracted rabies. Maybe. Theories abound about Poe's death, but there has not yet been anything that proves definitive or anything fittingly mysterious end for the master of mystery. There is a deeper dive into Poe's hidden meanings. While Edgar Allan Poe's work often explored dark and mysterious themes, the specific interpretation of hidden meanings is subjective and open to various interpretations. Many scholars and readers have analyzed Poe's work to uncover deeper meanings and codes related to psychological exploration. Poe often dove into the depths of the human psyche, exploring themes of madness, guilt, and the fear of death. His characters often represented aspects of the human condition, such as the struggle between reason and emotion. He was a social commentary. Some argue that Poe's works contain subtle social commentary, reflecting the anxieties and fears of his time. For example, The Telltale Heart might be seen as a critique of the oppressive nature of guilt and consciousness. There were Gothic elements in it. Poe's stories often employ Gothic elements such as haunted houses, supernatural beings, and a sense of impending doom. These elements can be interpreted as symbols of the unknown, the irrational, and the forces that threaten our sense of order. Well, there was also an existential theme to his work. Poe's work often grapples with existential questions about the meaning of life, death, and the nature of reality. His stories can be seen as explorations of the human condition and our search for meaning in a seemingly meaningless universe. It's important to note that these interpretations are not definitive and can vary depending on the reader's perspective and understanding of Poe's work. Many of Poe's stories can be interpreted in multiple ways, and the hidden meanings are often left up to the reader to discover. Here are some examples of how different readers might interpret Poe's work. For example, in The Raven, some interpret this poem as a metaphor for the loss of a loved one's and the speaker's descent into madness. Others see it as a commentary on the limitations of human knowledge and understanding. The Telltale Heart, some interpret this story as a psychological exploration of guilt and paranoia. Others see it as a critique of the oppressive nature of conscience. The Fall of the House of Usher, some interpret this story as a metaphor for the decline of a family, society, or civilization. Others see it as an exploration of the power of the imagination and the mind's ability to create its own reality. Well, when I saw The House of Usher, I saw a clearly woven deal with the devil and the consequences. Ultimately, the interpretations of hidden meanings in Poe's work is a personal journey, I guess it's just personal for me, that can lead to a deeper understanding of both the author and the stories themselves. It's likely that Edgar Allan Poe made some people very angry during his lifetime. His works often explored dark and controversial themes, and his personal life was marked by controversy and scandal. Here are some possible reasons why Poe might have made people angry. His controversial themes, well, his stories and poems, they dealt with taboo subjects such as death, madness, and the supernatural. These themes could have been offensive to some readers and critics, and families, and governments, and corporations. These themes could have also, scratched someone's back and then stabbed it. His personal life, was marked by controversy and scandal, including his battles with addiction and his involvement in a plagiarism scandal. These controversies may have alienated some people. His criticism of society, some of Poe's work contained subtle or overt criticism of society in general. For example, his story, The Telltale Heart, can be seen as a critique of the oppressive nature of guilt and conscience. He struggled financially throughout most of his life. His income was primarily derived from writing, and he often had difficulty making ends meet. He frequently relied on loans and advances from publishers just to survive. But survive he did until the age of 40. Now, as you guys know, as I know, there are entities out there that does not want their information to be out in the public. And if it is the government under times like now, they would sic the CIA on you or the FBI. Could Edgar Allan Poe have been coming too close to the truth throughout his writings in order to receive a visitation from entities that don't play fair? I don't know. So his political affiliations were very complex and not always consistent. I wanted to find out if Poe, was, back then into communism or socialism or capitalism. Now, he was often associated with the Whig Party, WHIG, particularly during his early years. His views were not always aligned with the party's platform, however. Some scholars suggest that Poe's political views were more nuanced than that he may have held anti-democratic, anti-Jacksonian, and even pro-slavery sentiments. However, these interpretations are often based on limited evidence and can be debated. Ultimately, Poe's political views remain a subject of scholarly debate. And there is no definitive consensus of or on his affiliation to anything in the political aspect. His work, however, provides some clues about his thoughts on society, politics, and human nature. Based on the limited information that's out there about Edgar Allan Poe's political views, it's difficult to definitively find anything that he believed in. However, some scholars do suggest that he may have held the following beliefs. Definitely anti-democratic. Poe's work often expressed a distrust of democracy and a preference for a more hierarchical social order. Anti-Jacksonian, while Poe may have been opposed to the policies of Andrew Jackson, a populist Democrat who was the president during Poe's lifetime. He was pro-slavery. While there is no explicit evidence of Poe's support for slavery, some scholars have suggested that his views may have been influenced by the prevailing attitudes of his time and region. Basically, since slavery was legal back then, if you're pro for it, they can't tell because it's legal. Pro or anti, at that time, before Edgar's death, it wasn't made into some big deal as it is now. Again, these are the times that they lived in, not mine. Edgar's work explores a wide range of themes, but some reoccurring motifs do include death and loss. Many of Poe's works deal with the themes of death and loss, often exploring the psychological impact of these events on individuals. Madness and the supernatural. Poe's stories often delve into the realms of madness and the supernatural, exploring the boundaries between reality and the unknown. The macabre of the grotesque. Poe's work is often characterized by its macabre and grotesque imagery, which can be unsettling and disturbing, especially for the time that he was writing. They just didn't write that way in the past. What gave him such imagination to write such grotesque things back then? He was interested in the human psyche. Poe was deeply interested in that and often explored the darker aspects of human nature, such as guilt, fear, and obsession. The limitations of human knowledge and understanding. Many of Poe's works explore the limitations of human knowledge and understanding, suggesting that there are aspects of the world that we cannot fully comprehend. Perhaps he was onto something or knew something, but that something could have just driven him mad. So I wanted to do a deep dive into Poe's cryptic codes. And really, there's no definitive evidence of a hidden government or societal code within Poe's writings. that I could find, but his works do contain complex linguistic patterns and symbolic imagery that can be interpreted in various ways. Poe is a master of language, and his works often demonstrate a deep understanding of literary devices and techniques. These include symbolism. And throughout all of his work, the symbolism of Satanism is prevalent. Poe frequently employed symbolic imagery to represent deeper meanings. For example, the raven in his poem of the same name can be interpreted as a symbol of loss, grief, and the irrational. Alteration of assonance. Poe's use of alliteration and assonance creates a musical and rhythmic quality to his writing, often enhancing the emotional impact of his poems. And there is repetition, meaning he's trying to say something. Poe often repeats words, phrases, or images, creating a sense of emphasis and reinforcing key themes. While these linguistic patterns can be interpreted in various ways, there's no clear evidence that they constitute a hidden code related to government or societal structures. Poe's works are primarily focused on exploring the human psyche and the supernatural rather than conveying secret messages or exposing hidden agendas. That's what the academia want. I believe there are plenty of hidden agendas and symbology and code that Edgar was trying to put out. Basically, he's telling the stories of the rich and what they go through, and what the poor and what they go through, and the reasoning behind it. And that's why it's grotesque, because back then they weren't exposing this kind of information, that the king and queen of a region were Luciferian in nature or were part of secret societies. And Edgar Allan Poe, although approached by the Freemasons, was ultimately, according to some scholars, rejected because he was a drunk. But I highly doubt that was true, because they don't reject drunks. But the Freemasons definitely had an interest in him because they wanted to control him. And maybe that was the reason why he drank too much. He was on to something, and was publishing and was getting information out there that they could not control. So I believe there are codes related to government and societal structures, and they were after him. Some readers have proposed that Poe may have hidden secret messages or ciphers in his works, but these claims have not been substantiated by mainstream academia, right? They're not going to believe it because, it's a conspiracy theory. And although his writings contain complex linguistic patterns and symbolic imagery, academia says there's no clear evidence of a hidden government or societal code. His works are primarily focused on exploring the human psyche and the supernatural, and any interpretation of hidden meanings are speculative. However, what better way, if he was a master at linguistics, a master at language, what better way to get the truth out there for people to find and not get caught or killed? However, they were onto him. Conspiracy theories often interpret Edgar Allan Poe's work as a series of coded messages or warnings about secret societies, hidden agendas, and government conspiracies. They may point to specific passages or symbols in the stories and poems as evidence of his involvement in or knowledge of these secret plots. Some common conspiracy theories related to Poe include secret societies. Some theories believe that Poe was a member or had knowledge of secret societies like the Freemasons or the Illuminati. They may cite references to secret symbols or rituals in his work as evidence. There are hidden messages. Conspiracy theorists often claim that Poe's work contains hidden messages or ciphers that reveal secret information about government conspiracies or the true nature of reality. And again, this is back in the 1800s. I think the guy was a freaking genius. The government involvement, some theorists believe that Poe was involved in or had knowledge of government conspiracies, such as the assassination of John F. Kennedy. They may point to specific references in his work as evidence. That's where we get into Edgar Allan Poe, the time traveler. which is pretty interesting stuff, but I'm getting ahead of myself. It is important to note that these are just a few examples of conspiracy theories related to Edgar Allan Poe. And there are many other variations, meaning there's lots of books out there about people believing that Edgar Allan Poe was the first conspiracy theorist, and he was trying to expose corruption. But he knew that if he just said it on the street, no one would listen. So he decided to write poems and short stories to get his point across, and was using psychological sublimation just like they were doing. But instead, his stories were about exposing them. Their stories was about controlling you. Here are a few examples of the conspiracy theories related to him. Illuminati connection. Some theorists believe that Poe was a member of the Illuminati, a secret society that allegedly controls world events. They point to references to secret symbols and rituals in his work as evidence. There are hidden messages all throughout. Conspiracy theorists often claim that Poe's work contains hidden messages or ciphers that reveal secret information about government conspiracies or the true nature of reality. For example, some believe that the poem The Raven contains a hidden code that references the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. There is government involvement. Some theorists believe that Poe was involved in or had knowledge of government conspiracies, such as the assassination of Kennedy, like we mentioned. And they may point to specific references in his work, such as a mention of the Secret Service in the story The Telltale Heart as evidence. And Edgar Allan Poe, the time traveler, like Baron Trump and Donald Trump. There is a more outlandish theory suggesting that Poe was a time traveler from the future who was sent back to the past to warn people about future events. They point to references to advanced technology or unusual events in his work as evidence. He's also a famous quotist. His most famous quote I like is, "Believe nothing of what you read and only half of what you see." Some other quotes of his are, "I am an artist. I am not a politician." Or, "I am a man of paradoxes." Or, "Beauty is the province of the soul." Or, "The only true paradise is the one we make for ourselves." Or, "All that we see or seem is but a dream within a dream." Or, "I am a man of mystery. I am a man of contradictions. I am a man of sorrows. I am a man of many faces. I am a man of many names." Could he be the devil? Did Edgar Allan Poe have the power to travel through time? It's not just a well-known circumstance of his life. Orphaned at birth, father of the mystery novel, master of cryptology, maestro of the macabre, nor am I referring to the head-scratching details of his death, how he was found in a gutter wearing someone else's clothes, babbling incoherently about an unidentified man named Reynolds. I won't get into the confounding reports of a nameless figure who, for 7 decades, would show up to Poe's gravesite on the early hours of his birthday, dressed in black with a glass of cognac and 3 roses. Curious and tragic, yes, but hardly evidence that the acclaimed horror writer could transcend the limits of space and time. No, my time travel theory concerns the author's creative output, which you'll soon see is a flukishly prophetic as to many of my outlandish claims seem plausible or probable. The proof is in the pudding. And the pudding is a loosely linked map of flesh-eating floaters, crunched skull survivors, and primordial particles. Written in 1837, Poe's only completed novel detailed a mutiny on a whaling ship lost at sea. Out of supplies, the men revert to cannibalism, drawing straws to elect a sacrifice. A boy named Richard Parker draws the shortest straw and is subsequently eaten. Interesting. Richard Parker. Wasn't that in a movie, The Lion? Wasn't the lion called Richard Parker when they were lost at sea? What was that movie called? The lion, the kid that was stuck with all the zoo animals at sea. Oh, Drawing a blank. But interesting enough. So obviously that story was written in a nod to Edgar Allan Poe. Now here's where it gets weirder. In 1884, 46 years later, after the novel's publication, 4 men would be set adrift following the sinking of their yacht. Shipwrecked and without food, they too would go the survival cannibalism route, electing to kill and eat a 17-year-old cabin boy. His name just so happened to be Richard Parker. All right, so Edgar Allan Poe wrote that in 1837, and less than 10 years later, the cruise survivors ate Richard Parker. So that happened. The extraordinary parallel went unnoticed for nearly a century until a widely circulated letter from a descendant of the real Parker outlined the similarities between the novel scene and the actual event. The letter was selected for publication in the Sunday Times after the journalist Arthur Koestler put out a call for tales of striking coincidence. Striking indeed. In 1848, a railroad worker named Phineas Gage suffered a traumatic brain injury after taking an iron spike through the skull. Ouch. Somehow he survived, though his personality would change drastically. These behavioral changes were closely studied, allowing the medical community to develop the first understanding of the role played by the frontal lobe on social cognition. Except for Poe, who'd inexplicably understood the profound personality changes caused by frontal lobe syndrome for nearly a decade. In 1840, he penned a characteristically gruesome story called The Businessman, about an unnamed narrator who suffers a traumatic head injury as a young boy, leading to a life of obsessive, regularly, and violent sociopathic outbursts. Wow. Poe's grasp of frontal lobe syndrome is so precise that neurologist Eric Altschuler writes, "There's a dozen symptoms and he knows every single one. There's everything in that story. We've hardly learned anything more," according to Altschuler, who, to reiterate, is a medically licensed neurologist and not at all a crackpot, goes on to say, "It's so exact that it's just weird. It's like he had a time machine." Well, are you still unconvinced? What if I told you that Poe predicted the origins of the universe 80 years before modern science would begin to formulate the Big Bang's theory? Surely an amateur stargazer with no formal training in cosmology could not accurately describe the machinery of the universe, rejecting widely held inaccuracies while solving a theoretical paradox that had bewildered astronomers since Kepler. Except that's exactly what had happened. The prophetic vision came in from the form of the book Eureka, a 150-page prose poem critically panned for its complexity and regarded by many as the work of a madman. Written in the final year of the author's life, Eureka describes an expanding universe that began in one instantaneous flash, derived from a single primordial particle. Whoa. Poe goes on to put forth the first legitimate solution, Olber's paradox, the question of why, given the vast number of stars in the universe, the night sky is dark, by explaining that light from the expanding universe had not yet reached our solar system. When Edward Robert Harrison published Darkness at Night in 1987, he credited Eureka as having anticipated his findings. Oh, he quoted Edgar Allan Poe. The mystery continues. In an interview with Nautilus, Italian astronomer Alberto Capi speaks of Poe's pre-science, admitting it's surprising that Poe arrived at his dynamically evolving universe because there was no observational or theoretical evidence suggesting such a possibility. No astronomer in Poe's day could imagine a non-static universe. But what if Poe wasn't of a day at all? But what if he was of all days? What if his writing or written prophecies on the cannibalistic demise of Richard Parker, the symptoms of frontal lobe syndrome, and the Big Bang Theory were merely reportage from his journey through the extra-temporal continuum? Well, obviously I sound like I'm wearing a foil hat, right? But maybe there are many more prophecies scattered throughout the author's work, a possibility made all the more likely by the fact that, as the New York Times notes, Poe was so undervalued for so long, there is not a lot of Poe-related material around. Interesting. So was he a Freemason? Was he part of the secret societies? I don't think so. Just judging by how he was anti-government, period. And more for a better way versus, kings and peasants. Edgar Allan Poe's relationship with Freemasonry is somewhat complex and has been the subject of lots of speculation. While he is known to have had some connections to Masonic circles through his family and acquaintances, there is no definitive evidence that he was openly opposed to Freemasonry as an institution. Reason for that speculation is his personal experience. Poe had a tumultuous life filled with personal and professional struggles, including financial instability and conflicts with other writers and editors. Some biographers suggest that his negative experiences with certain individuals who were Masons may have colored his views. Could be. I know he was approached by them. We just don't know if he accepted it. And I'm pretty sure that if he didn't and they wanted him down, they were going to harm him. But they most likely would not want him in the lodge, because if he got in the lodge and got through the degrees, he would most definitely write some horror short stories about how evil the secret societies are. So, in my opinion, they would steer far away from him, but send assassins. He also, he was a literary critique. In some of his work, Poe critiques institutions and social structures which could extend to organizations like the Freemasons. His view on secret societies may reflect a broader skepticism about the influence of such groups on society. Themes of isolation. Much of Poe's writings explore themes of isolation and alienation, which could be interpreted as a critique of exclusive social organizations, including the Masons. His characters often grapple with feelings of being outsiders, which might resonate with his views on such groups. Masonic symbolism is in his work. Some scholars do argue that Poe's use of the Masonic symbols and themes in his stories could indicate a fascination with or critique of the organization rather than outright opposition. This duality complicates the interpretation of his stance, and that's why there's really no definitive evidence pointing one way or the other. While there are indications that Poe may have had a complicated relationship with Freemasonry, there is no clear evidence that he was explicitly opposed to it. Much of what is suggested is based on an interpretation of his life experiences and literary themes rather than documented opposition. Poe wasn't opposed to Freemasonry. He wasn't opposed to it, apparently. As a social fraternity, he did reference it famously in the Cask of Amontillado, which was written only 3 years before his ultimately untimely death. Could have been where they finally got him to join, and he joined, and then he wrote about them, and then they killed him. Just like what they were saying they shouldn't do, but they got him in, and then he wrote about them in the cask, and then they killed him. There was a political movement, the Anti-Masonic Party, that was sort of active during his lifetime, but he wasn't ever listed as being part of it, nor was he particularly political. There's no record of Poe ever joining or even applying to the fraternity. Interestingly enough, conspiracy nutbags like me seem to like to tell a story about Poe being rejected for membership because he was a drunk. Well, we just don't know. And that's not really a reason for the rejection either. Destitution, on the other hand, and history indicates that Poe was the first writer to ever make a living solely as a writer. He was a poet. As a writer who makes his money as a writer, I can tell you that being a poet isn't the best choice if a writer is shooting for anything even close to solvency. If a man is going to end up being a burden on the lodge, then he is usually politely told that he was rejected for membership. But again, there's no record of Poe being rejected for membership. Edgar Allan Poe vigorously denounced the Jeffersonian ideal of democracy. He had no sympathy in abstract political notions, such as those which had produced liberal republican theory in Americas and elsewhere. Like Edmund Burke, Poe was highly suspicious of the well-constructed republic, just like me. In 1839, for example, the editor Rufus Griswold, who would later feature as perhaps Poe's most famous enemy, and New England's poet Park Benjamin, revolutionized American periodicals by launching cheap literary magazines, The Brother Jonathan and New World Order. But was he the first conspiracy theorist? Well, maybe we can find some clues here in Poe's argument against a utopia. I found this little part of a book very interesting. I'm going to read it because it really does give us some clues as to how this man thought, and was he the real conspiracy theorist? Was he doing it right? Meaning, if we are going to expose the New World Order or expose the Bushes and their big plan for the big idea, the New World Order, or expose the Breakspear family or the Orsini family, if that's even legitimately true, then even during times like this, we get on social media, and when we say things, hey, this is who's controlling the world, we still don't grab the ear or the attention of the world. Yet Edgar Allan Poe was able to do this through writing beautiful stories and poems. Maybe that's what is needed. Maybe he is setting the stage for how we expose these Luciferian baby eaters and put them down for good. Poe's reaction to perfectibility theory reflects predelications deeper than just an intellectual stance. Because of his psychic drive towards self-alienation, he mistrusted on an instinctual level all forms of society. I do too. I don't trust any of it. This bias manifested itself variously, from his well-documented dislike of politicians to the abundance of misanthropes scattered through his fiction. I don't like them either. For example, the narrator in The Man of the Crowd dismisses with almost a sneer the mania of his subject, suggesting a moral in keeping with the tale's motto by La Bure, si grand malheur de ne peut voir le sud. Consequently, Poe could not agree with philosophers such as Condorcet, because they dealt with civilization, whereas he would rather ignore society and instead analyze the relationship between man and universe. So it's like Poe is saying, I don't feel like worshiping man, temples, and societies and government. He's like, there's something bigger than that. And Poe is always reaching towards the universe and the things that we don't know, consequently harming the leaders of those times in trying to get people to think outside of the box back then. Interesting. One aspect of Poe's social evidence in his work is a counter-utopian element. He pursues similar themes in 3 short stories, The Devil in the Belfry, and The Mosque of the Red Death, and The System of Dr. Tar and Professor Feather. All 3 works present an enclosed society seemingly utopian in character, but each is doomed by some inherent fallacy. As Hawthorne tried to do in the Blithedale romance, Poe may have intended to comment on the social experiments of his day. Undoubtedly, Poe opposed such communities. In his 1845 response to the review of The Raven and other poems in The Harbinger, Poe labeled the editors who were associated with Brook Farm as respectable crazyites. Respectable crazyites. He dismissed the reviewer's comments as all leather and prunella, hoping that in the future, the snook form phalanx will never have any opinion of us at all. Although his quarrel concerned literary matters, Poe's tone indicates that his dissatisfaction had a more fundamental basis, so deep-rooted that he could never agree with any conclusion drawn from such an experimental culture. I agree with this guy. I like this guy. I have no idea if he believes in God or not, because he never really said much about it. But holy cow, he sure knows more about evil on the earth than he does about God. Here, though, one critical difficulty arises. Post-perfectionists probably would have disapproved of utopian communities. For example, Priestley believed that rapid change would achieve little lasting effect. Also, perfectibility theory predicts large-scale social improvements. For proof, the perfectionists analyzed the rise and fall of major civilizations throughout history. Projects of the size of a brook farm or fruitlands would be beneath their notice. Condorcet envisioned that the political advances in revolutionary France would affect the world. So what they were trying to do in France is try to build a better form of control. And we know that the bloodlines financed both ends of the Revolutionary War in France. And it's all about bringing in some form of ism or ethos or epoch in order to satisfy the people for a moment so that later they can start stealing, killing, and destroying again. And Edgar Allan Poe is reading right through it saying, whatever city or country or corporation, whatever you put together, will fall. What goes up must come down. So he's saying, I don't agree with any city, county, state, country, corporation, none of it. Because all you do is steal, kill, and destroy. And that's a virus. And he writes about that. On the other hand, a 19th century utopian communities, for the most part, retreated from the main current of American history. Thus, to perfectionist theory, these communities would represent only isolated, insignificant variations that ultimately failed to promote the general conditions of the human race. You could look at that as like America, you know? We started off as a great country. We started off as a free country. We started off as a country with open borders. We said, come on, bring us, you're tired, you're poor, you're hungry, you're sick. Bring us anybody, and we will take you in and we will work together. But what is America now? We got open borders and we have no money. So where did that leave us? We're in the same position, but no money. Before, we had the entire resources of America, which had been exploited by the central bank. The Federal Reserve is what took us down and made us indebted to the crown. Nonetheless, Poe's treatment of utopias in his fiction has partial origins in his views on perfectibility. In one sense, the societies in The Devil in the Belfry, the Mosque of the Red Death, and the system of Dr. Tar and Professor Feather, Tar and Feather, you get it, demonstrate at least one aspect of perfection in microcosm. Using both comic and Gothic motifs, Poe traces an ironic downfall in each case. A degeneration based upon the principle he elaborated in Eureka. In the original unity of the first thing lies the secondary cause of all things, with the germ of their inevitable annihilation. This guy just blows my mind. As the beauty of the universe must end in, nonetheless, so societies, regardless of how perfect in conception, must eventually fall. Moreover, the cause of their destruction will be internally spawned. just like in America. Look at what we're doing inside America. Look how your own government has somehow made it offensive to carry the American flag inside your own fucking country. Your own government. How is that even possible? To where being an American and standing up for your country is now right-wing extremist. And that phrase did not come from an external source. That came from your internal media news departments. What goes up must come down. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. It happens. This is why I have come to acceptance of the fall of America. Because there is no way I personally can do a thing about it. There's nothing I can do about it. Even Edgar Allan Poe, the most famous writer for his day, was getting paid to write, the first writer to get paid to write. And he was writing about the aristocratic notion of putting a society together under an ism, claiming it's the best utopia, and they never, ever, ever work. Ever. So I believe that Edgar Allan Poe was a fucking genius. I do not believe he was a drunkard Freemason just out of his mind, maniacal because of his own writings. I think he could see the future because he could see that societies go up and they come down. And he could see it happening, coming to America, and he wrote about it. So he wasn't going to get excited about the colonialism to capitalism to whatever next comes in line. He's saying those that have the money and who control all things are putting up a lie in front of you in the form of paperwork and a country with a flag, with a mission statement, and it's all bullshit. Edgar was also mentioned saying, as the beauty of the universe must end in nothingness, so societies, regardless of how perfect in conception, must eventually fail. Moreover, the cause of their destruction will be internally spawned. Thus, in exposing the imperfections of small-scale cultures, Poe demonstrates the pitfalls for larger civilizations. Likewise, since utopians pretend to goals similar to those of the perfectionists, Poe's fictional treatment of one has implications for the other. In essence, then, perfectibility theory flounders because all things, including perfection, cannot be sustained, especially in a thermodynamic world. Even if the rapt day dreams of Disdale become reality, they would be short-lived and consequently meaningless. For Poe, civilization always returns to some previous wretched point in the cycle of history. Amanda asked, have you ever seen the movie The Pale Blue Eye? He's a character in it. I loved it. No, I haven't seen that, but I'll take a look. In this comic tale, The Devil in the Belfry, Poe attacks utopia's delicate balance. The community of Vondervatamitis incorporates various social infrastructures that make it appear ideal. Its demography has a mathematical regularity. In a perfectly circular valley, 60 dwellings are equally interspaced along a quarter-mile circumference that defines the town's border. Each home lies 60 yards from the center of the circle. The repetition of the number 60 implies minutes and seconds, suggesting that one more symbol in the story will be time. Vondervotamidis itself, which is a town, seems laid out according to an algebraic formula in which time is a key variable. Poe supports this theme by placing a circular path, a sundial, and 24 cabbages, obviously alluding to the number of hours in a day in each domestic garden. Poe follows the clock-like precision of the town's layout with other uniformities. For example, the buildings themselves are so precisely alike that one in no manner has distinguished from the other. Constructed of red bricks and black ends, the outside walls resemble chessboards upon a great scale. Poe continues the geometric pattern inside each dwelling with square-tiled floors. All objects, indoors and out, seems positioned to fulfill some role in perpetuating the town's limited perspectives and purpose. Checkerboards. He was well aware of duality, good and evil. Perhaps proposing in a jest a relationship between physical stature and moral character, Poe inflates the girth of the town's citizens. In each home, all are corpulent, from the head of the house to the lobby cat. In fact, the higher a villager's social status, the factor he will become. Above the average citizen are the members of the town council, who are all very little, round, oily, intelligent men with big saucer eyes and fat double chins. The most exalted official of the town is the belfry man, whose stomach is very far bigger than those of any other old gentleman in the village, and as to his chin, it is not only double but triple. The belfry's man's function is to tend the great clock located atop the council building in the center of the village. The clock's 7 faces indicate the 7 days of the week. In the memory of the oldest inhabitant of the town, the clock has never malfunctioned, nor has anything changed in Vandervatenemitis. This stagnation owes itself to the town philosophy articulated in the council's 3 resolutions, which is that it is wrong to alter the good old course of things. Number 2, that there is nothing tolerable out of Vondervotamidis. And number 3, that we will stick by our clocks and our cabbages. I love it. The narrator of the tale claims that the Dutch borough was once the finest place in the world. It has all the earmarks of the ideal. It is isolated from the terrors of the rest of civilization. It has physical and social structures that are intricately balanced, and its citizens are content with their condition. The philosophy of intransigence dooms the town, however. Anything from the outside world, that is, anything new, must disrupt the social machinery. Consequently, when a devilish-looking man invades the town from the east, attacks the clock keeper, and causes the perfect clock to strike 13 at noon, public harmony irrevocably shatters. Critical interpretations of the tale reveal several facets of Poe's quarrel with the perfectionists. Whereas Condorcet believed that no limitations existed for the perfectibility of man, Poe saw boundaries in such perfection, characterizing them as anti-intellectual, artistically confining, and morally stagnant. He based this assessment on the notion that social perfection entails a fixed social order. Poe regarded this balance as being so precarious that no growth can be permitted, for any new idea would tilt the scales of public harmony. So basically, no society can exist free from outside influences. However, even if the perfectionists achieved their ideals on a planetary scale, Poe would still argue that external forces could upset civilization. In the conversation of Eros and Charmian, for example, a cosmological cataclysm intervenes into the affairs of men as a comet destroys the Earth. Thus, in describing Vondervotamidis, Poe projects his conception of the logical consequence of human progress theory. By exposing the town internal flaw, he demonstrates allegorically the fallacies contained in perfectionist assumptions. Whew. The Mask of the Red Death. Prospero's world in the Mosque of the Red Death bears striking similarities to Vonder Votamidis. Both cultures pursue voluntary isolation from the outside world. Both have an omnipresent enemy to defend against the antagonist. Each constructs a philosophy in which alienation becomes a virtue. Whew. As a physical and intellectual defense mechanism, though, alienation fails, for its practical foundation is unsubstantial. In adopting such a tenuous belief, then the two societies in effect promote their own dissolution, especially in light of the stealth of inexorableness of their chosen enemies. We'll move on after this quick little break.
If you're looking for a publication that delivers honest takes and critical insights into the issues of our day, then look no further than The Flame Paper. The Flame Paper is written for the people, by the people, who aren't afraid to challenge a mainstream narrative, be it healthcare, voter fraud, political correctness, or even the one world government. The Flame is full of timely articles, reports, and expert advice written by freedom-loving, truth-telling experts, journalists, and concerned citizens. To subscribe, go to theflameusa.com.
Go to The Flame! Get the newspaper. Guys, crude oil is in your body. It's in your body. Not my fault. Did you know crude oil is in your detergents? You put crude oil on your body after you wash your clothes. Did you know crude oil is in your dishwashing detergent? You spray or pour a sludge of crude oil in your dishwasher and you scrub your dishes with crude oil. I'm not joking. 95% of all pharmaceutical pills on the market are made of crude oil. I'm not joking. It's made of crude synthetically, but it's still a piece of crude oil. I don't think crude oil belongs in our body. Have you ever wondered how much crude oil you are actually swallowing a day? And it's not a trick question. It is in everything from dishwashing soap, medicine, to even bottled water, guys. Not including the heavy metals that are in our food and our underarm deodorants like aluminum. It's killing us. It all started 100 years ago when Standard Oil started selling oil for anything but combustion engines. Oh, we've got to make more money. We've got all the money we need, but let's put oil in our diet. That's what Rockefeller decided. What a great guy, huh? Not. It all started when Standard Oil decided to get into other places to make more money. Now, 95% of pharmaceutical medicine is made from crude oil, and this is why your gut is upside down. And since you can't process foods normally because your gut doesn't have the good bacteria that kills parasites, and guess what? The parasites live in you, and they eat you and poop you out. That's what they do. And allegedly causes cancer. Our Invisible Threat research team put together a publication for you to read about the cause of all modern diseases and the invisible threats that harm the human body. Go to ElitePotion.com. Check it out. Our company also created a product right here, Elite Potion, that you may want to consider after reading our publication. Heavy metals and parasites are now being ignored by our body, and they're just passing into our bloodstream due to our gut and brain health because of crude oil. You may find in our detailed report that you have been lied to, and your life and your loved ones' lives could be at risk. Download our complimentary publication informing consumers of the cost of industrialized medicine, food additives, and weather modification that damages the gut and brain, leading to modern-day diseases. Go to elitepotion.com. Elitepotion.com. It's simple. I created it for you. This is how we support the show. If you want to support the show, start taking this product. By taking this product, you're going to live longer. You're going to feel better because it is attaching to the heavy metals and flushing it out of your system. It is killing and attaching to the parasites and flushing them out of your body. I can't change the crude oil that's in commodities right now. I can't get them to stop putting it in your body. So unfortunately, this is the only thing that you can take right now on the market together that can remove those two things. I made it for you. I've been on it for 2 months. I feel great. I'm more alert. I'm remembering things even more. Even though I had a good memory before, I'm actually doing much better. And I'm happy about it. Go to elitepotion.com, sign up, and tell them James sent you. Well, it's my company, so you'll have to tell me that me sent you. Me sent you. All right, getting back to the Mosque of the Red Death. In Prospero's world, Prospero was a character. In the Mosque of the Red Death, he bears a striking similarity to Vonder Vatamititis. It's in the Edgar Allan Poe's city of clocks and cabbages. Both cultures pursue voluntary isolation from the outside world. Both have an omnipresent enemy to defend against the antagonist. Each construct a philosophy in which alienation becomes a virtue. As a physical and intellectual defense mechanism, though, alienation fails, for its practical foundation is unsubstantial. In adopting such a tenuous belief, then the two societies, in effect, promote their own dissolution, especially in light of the stealth and inexorableness of their chosen enemies. Prospero's enemy is death. His foe assumes death's most extreme form, a plague that claims its victims with the rapidity of wildfire. Characterized by intense pain, nausea, and epidermal bleeding, the Red Death has already claimed half of the kingdom's population as the tale opens. In confining himself and 1,000 followers to the deep seclusion of one of his castellated abbeys, Prospero flees on a literal level from horrible death, but on a symbolic one, he tries to escape all death, suggesting a desire to live forever. You know, like the rich prosperity preachers. Prosperity gospel. Prospero. Is this guy not a genius or what? Interestingly, in his writings on human progress, Condorcet courts the same notions in his discussion on the advance of medicine. Condorcet is a guy who's writing about Edgar Allan Poe that I took out of his book. Organic perfectibility or deterioration among the various strains in the vegetables and the animal kingdom can be regarded as one of the general laws of nature. The law also applies to the human race. No one can doubt that as preventative medicine improves. What the hell is this? That is not part of what I'm talking about. So, in the example under consideration, we're bound to believe that oh my God. That doesn't make any sense. Although Condorcet, although he did not target the French philosopher's view specifically in the tale, the similarity between Poe's reaction to perfectibility and the moral of Mosque demonstrates the remarkable consistency of his intellectual stance with his artistry. Unlike von der Votenmitti's geological barricade, Prospero protects himself with man-made structures, high walls, iron gates, and welded entrances. He adapts a philosophy, though, that resembles the town council's resolution, which really is, what's interesting is this is just like the Bible says, as all of the leaders of the world are going to go underground when Jesus comes, and they will tell the rocks, fall on me before he finds me. Very interesting. So this is the philosophy of the town council's resolution. With such precautions, the courtiers might bid defiance to contagion. The external world could take care of itself. In the meantime, it was folly to grieve or to think. The prince had provided all of the applications of pleasure. There were buffoons, there were improvisatory. There were ballet dancers, there were musicians, there were beauty, there was wine. All of these and security were within. Without was the Red Death. Now, the resemblance between the societies of Mosque and Belfry continues in Poe's use in time symbolism. Both cultures are mesmerized by the chiming of a clock. The inhabitants of Prospero's palace fall hourly into catatonic trances, which quotes, and the revel went whirlingly on until at length there commenced the sounding of midnight upon the clock. And then the music ceased, as I have told, and the evolutions of the waltzers were quieted, and there was an uneasy cessation of all things as before. Unquote. Although von der Votenmitti's great clock had 7 faces to ensure that no villager could escape its influence, the chimes of Prospero's clocks pervade 7 rooms. The significance of the number 7 becomes apparent in Poe's imaginative panorama of the abbatial floor plan. Critics have maintained that each chamber represents a chronological life stage. The 7th compartment is decorated in red and black, obviously symbolic of death and duality. Well, red and black, no. Red and black is symbolic of death, right. All right. Although the other chambers are well occupied, few people stray into the last room. In fact, on the fatal day of the masquerade, the cell is uninhabited, as if man was not meant to enter voluntarily. When the grisly apparition of the Red Death materializes, Prospero pursues it from the first room through to the 6th. On the threshold of the last, death claims the prince. Symbolically, therefore, the universe limits man's development as a species to the 6th stage of life. Correspondingly, Poe mentions that Prospero schedules the masquerade 5 or 6 months after his seclusion, indicating that the self-imprisoned society could not last a 7th month. As Poe uses them, the number 6 and 7 suggest biblically associations. The week symbolically represents by time. Elements in Belfry become in Mosque the biblical week of creation. Traditional interpretation of Genesis ascribes denotations of perfection to 7. Because he was created on the 6th day, man perpetually lies one step short of that perfection. For Prospero, then, his human limitations dictate that his corporeal existence cannot enter death's room. Implicitly, Poe suggests that man's only chance for perfectibility is in death. Maybe that's why Satan wants to kill us all. Prospero fears death. However, he creates a superficial utopia to stave it off. Yet his bizarre imagination designs the stimulus to destruct and destruction. The macabre chamber in which the Red Death conquers. In his attempt to lock death outside his world, Prospero only accentuates its effects, for the inhabitants take painful note of each hour's passing. In the enclosed utopia, a horrible death becomes more horrible, Whereas the external world has resolved itself in the presence of the Red Death, Prospero's society believes that the disease no longer poses a threat. So when the final cataclysm befalls, 3 more psychological effects augment the already grisly list of symptoms: surprise, panic, and astonishment. Also in the barricaded castle, the malady infects all. An attrition rate twice that experienced by the external world. By its own design, therefore, Prospero's carefully architected universe collapses ironically from within. Do you understand what he's saying? Do you understand the whole point in creating and becoming God with the 3 double chins? And yet, you know your demise is death. It will come anyway. So what Poe is trying to say in his writings are, it doesn't matter how high you get, society will crumble. You will lose your throne every single time. Man only lives up to 120 years. And you're trying to live like you're a god. And yet death will follow you even until death. And what Edgar is trying to say is, why do we have to live under a rule of any epoch or ethos or ism? For it's not going to work. It will fail. They all fail. And this is why the 2 families pass the spear of destiny every 500 years. In fact, one could argue they should be doing it every 250 years, because that seems to be the real year, how long it takes a society to figure out that they were screwed or they were plagued. Do you understand? The system of Dr. Tar and Professor Feather touches upon the connection between social progress and cultural order. The first of 2 utopian societies described by Poe in the tale can be observed in the principles behind the soothing system, as elaborated by Monsieur Malherbe, who stresses the liberty permitted the psychiatric patients under such treatment methods. The ideal humanity that underlies the soothing system inspires admiration in the dim-witted narrator, so much so that he feels compelled to visit the institution when in the vicinity. Upon arriving, he discovers that the most progressive program of dealing with the insane in the country has been dismantled. Later, he learns that the beneficiaries of the system, the inmates, had taken advantage of the permissive atmosphere by revolting against their benefactors. Whew. Given that he chose to locate the asylum in France, Poe may have intended to analyze by allegory why the ancien regime failed. Many historians in both the 19th and 20th centuries suggest that one cause for the French Revolution was the monarchy's attempt to promote public welfare. With each small success, popular expectations of the government rose, eventually so fast that Louis XVI could not keep up with the demands, thereby instigating the revolution in 1789. In Tar and Feather, these reforms in pre-revolutionary France became the soothing system in context of Poe's political conservatism. The soothing system must fail, as did the ancient regime, because it grants too much freedom to the mob. Without adequate authority, society falls. And it falls victim to the unscrupulous. Thus, for Poe, altruism by authority only results in social disorder. Poe continues the French Revolution allegory with Monsieur Malherbe's mad reign of the Maison de Santé. The lunacy of Malherbe's anarchic society burlesques Robespierre's reign of terror. These are the names inside the story. Even the guillotine has a fictional equivalent in the tarring and feathering of the keepers. As the dinner table, each inmate pursues to the full his or her peculiar individuality, resulting in a chaotic social structure. Consequently, when their keepers free themselves and counter revolt, the patients have no defense other than to flee. Their escape is mental, however, for each retreats to some form of schizophrenia, such as crowning or crowing or spinning. Resembling many aspects of the weakly constructed communities in Mosque and Belfry, the society in Tar and Feather is utopian in the eyes of its members. As Maillard explains, fact, it all comes to pass by means of a stupid fellow, a lunatic, who, by some reason, had taken it into his head that he had invented a better system of government than ever heard of before. Of lunatic government, I mean. It reminds me of each president comes in, right? And each president comes in and says they're going to invent a better system of government than ever before. And it's a lunatic government. And following that, as prosperity begat obesity in Vonder Vatamidas, Maillard, too, is partly suggesting that overindulgence figures in his social status. Both he and the keeper of the belfry are the fattest members of their communities, reflecting their leadership. The fat cats. The more you make, the more you eat. America, we're pretty fat, aren't we? Until the narrator arrives, the inmates have had no dealings with outsiders, propelling the villagers' xenophobia in Belfry and Prospero's precautions against the Red Death. This isolation is supported by food and wine stores, recalling Prospero's provisions for his abbey. Eventually, though, the Tar and Feather inmates must exhaust their supplies because their seclusion cannot endure. Their mad utopia of self-gratification is foredoomed. The patients themselves secure their own overthrow. Wow. That's right, Boots. We will be 250 years old in America, 2025. Although he knows that exposure involves risks, Maillard invites the narrator to enter. At the dinner table, all the inmates commit Freudian slips that threaten to expose their identities. Ultimately, Maillard parades the details of the takeover before the narrator, who is too dense to surmise the truth because of the patient's attendance to the party. Moreover, they allow the unguarded keepers to effect an escape and thereby to resecure the institution. This yells of the attendants both during and after their captivity, frightening the madman into temporary mental withdrawals, a response similar to that caused by the tolling clocks in Vonder Vatamitas and Prospero's castle. The narrator of Tar and Feather describes the scene. When the point was very effectively and suddenly accomplished by a series of loud screams or yells from some portion of the main body of the chateau. My nerves were very affected indeed by these yells, but the rest of the company I really pitied. I never saw any set of reasonable people so thoroughly frightened in my life. They all grew pale as so many corpses, and shrinking within their seats, sat quivering and gibbering with terror, and listening for a repetition of the sound. It came again, louder and seemingly nearer, and then a third time very loud, and then a fourth time with a vigor evidently diminished. At this apparent dying away of the noise, the spirits of the company were immediately regained, and all was life and anecdote as before. Each shout represents another knell against Maillard's doomed society. For Poe, its fall demonstrates the inevitable hazards of excessive liberty. Inevitable hazards of excessive liberty. Wow. In conclusion, the common themes among the works analyzed above provide ample evidence of Poe's quarrel with utopian experiments. Considering the possibility that Tar and Feather comically allegorizes French revolutionary culture, critical interpretation of the counter-utopian motif has simultaneously made implications for Poe's views of perfectibility theory, because the 5 philosophers upon which he based his definition either anticipate, celebrate, or react to the overthrow of unpopular regimes in America and France. If Poe was a conspiracy theorist and tried to uncover the bloodline rituals and the fakery of ethos and parties to divide and conquer, then his writings were, for the tiny few that were awake to begin with, amazing and true. Only the critical thinkers and data crunchers that can read between the lines would see it. I believe Poe was against the aristocracy, bloodlines, and tried to expose them without getting murdered, but doing it in a way that nobody has done before, by telling poems and tales of fiction, gives him plausible deniability. But since he died at 40 under a mysterious death, one could assume he wasn't careful enough. And that is it. I hope you got a full description of Edgar Allan Poe and what he was trying to accomplish. This has been Cause Before Symptom. I'm your host, James Carner. Tune in tomorrow night, my last night until, well, after Labor Day. And, of course, our good old friend will join us. Don't forget to go to jamescarner.com, sign up for my newsletter, because it's the only way I can get a hold of you, and love your neighbor. If you love your neighbor, this world would be a better place. God bless you tomorrow.